Yeah, hello everybody. I hope everybody's having a good day or good morning. Over here, it's definitely a good morning for me. So yeah, it's let me just mute this. There we go. Um yes, as I said, I hope everybody's having a good day and enjoying themselves. I noticed that the stream before I even started had a few likes attached to it. You flatter me with your expectation of high quality and interesting discussion before you've even heard what I had to say. So, thank you so much, guys. Um, so yeah, today's discussion is just a very brief and uh, I say broad uh, think about what it is that makes a monster. Of course, the channel doesn't necessarily deal with monsters exclusively, but monsters are one of the main topics that we end up covering. And a lot of the times, the things that are discussed are presented in such a way, as to be creepy, like the Bunyip or the Jersey Devil, or, you know, basically a lot of creepy sound effects and music comes up. But that's not necessarily saying that these things are evil all of the time. It's just, it's fun to play it off as creepy. Nevertheless, it got me thinking as to what about a creature or an animal, or in this case at least the fantasy creatures, makes them monsters, and what makes them, animals. At least us perceive them as animals. Especially with regards to the Griffin and the Phoenix, I recently redid some short videos about those two creatures, just because it was interesting for practice and again getting back into the swing of things. I figured people really enjoyed those two creatures, so yeah. And apropos of that, and a conversation that I was having the other day, I thought, let's discuss what makes a monster. Excuse me. So yeah, that's basically what brings us to today's topic. And I thought, it's a little bit more casual. I don't want to necessarily assert anything too strongly. So uh, that would usually be reserved for a more formal video. This is more of just a discussion kind of thing, and feel free to share your opinion either now or later afterwards, and I'll have a bit of a chin wag or a finger tap with you. Finger tap, of course, means tapping away on the keyboard. So yeah. So I was thinking about it while walking actually to a waterfall the other day, that broadly, what makes something monstrous is our perception of it and its behavior, specifically in those two factors. I can't really see anything else besides those two factors, because usually something that is it's one of those linguistic tricks where if something is a monster, it's, how can I explain this? This is not, there's nothing within a living thing that makes it a monster per se. It's just necessarily the standpoint of the person who's experiencing that animal or that creature. So, well, let me show you. Here is a very silly picture of a T-Rex chasing a bunch of gazelle. This is apropos of Jurassic Park, and that was a very interesting story. Those of you who have had the opportunity to both read the novel as well as enjoy the film, both of which I highly recommend. Interestingly enough, just because they both approach the narrative from a different angle, where the novel is, the original story is more focused on the philosophy and the ideas that are presented throughout, the story and like the background and everything. The film takes the opposite approach and makes it more action oriented, and I think that both actually are very good for completely different reasons. So, Jurassic Park, yay, go watch it or read it if you haven't. I'm sure everybody has watched Jurassic Park at this point. um Interestingly enough, the more recent Jurassic Park films, the uh, Jurassic World, dives into the philosophy behind the actual creation of the dinosaurs a little bit more than the original trilogy. Well, the original trilogy, the original film, simply because it actually talks more about the Henry Wu, and that the dinosaurs are not actually dinosaurs, but more like just chimera made from this hodgepodge of DNA, and perchance they are able to reproduce, which leaves Henry Wu very, very happy. Um, so yeah, that's something to consider. Now, here, going back to the main point, here, this picture of a T-Rex hunting a bunch of gazelle, and very, very silly, but very fun nonetheless. Um, what what the what we see over here in this instance of this picture is something that is at least generally behaving like an animal, and we're not particularly scared of it. We don't have any issues with it running around. I mean, I would probably run away if I saw that anywhere near me, because that's horrifying. But we wouldn't necessarily consider that to be a monster. But in this case, what our perception is that this belongs in the environment. We sort of have an intuition for its behavior. We can engage with it. We can build a mental model of what it's about to do, or what it's planning to. It's by a bunch of gazelle roaring. You know what it's on about. You know that it's going to be running around. It's going to be grabbing something. It's going to be eating it, and it's going to be sated. It doesn't have any other intention beyond that. But when we necessarily encounter something new, any living thing that is new, we can't predict what it's going to do, based on the fact that we've never encountered it before. So for that reason, it appears monstrous to us, and this, I would say, is the first factor that would make something appear to be a monster to any person, is that it's new, we don't know what it is, and we have no concept of what its behavior pattern is like. I would like to offer an example. Think of ancient Rome or ancient Greece, where upon encountering animals from Africa or animals from the Far East, the Carthaginian War, for example, with Hannibal Barca trunching about on an elephant. When the Roman soldiers first saw this animal, they must have been like, "No, this is a monster," because you have no idea what an elephant is going to do, honestly, especially if you're just a random farmer from Rome. And elephants are pretty intelligent, so their behavior patterns are relatively unpredictable based on the animals that you would have seen at that point in your life. Cows or I guess aurochs. Yeah, aurochs were still around then, so. You see this relatively intelligent creature, actually also probably drunk, because I do know that they gave them alcohol to try and help them fight. And it must have been quite horrifying. So this point of being able to expect what an animal does, or being able to have a mental model of how an animal behaves, is actually very forthrightly brought in Jurassic Park, which I think that Michael Crichton did a very good job of presenting animal behavior in this novel, and this is why I recommend give it a read. Or I think you can probably find it on Audible. Everything's on Audible these days, so give it a listen there on Audible. It's a very, very good story. What you'll find is that the animals behave very, very authentically. I can imagine and have seen animals behave in such a fashion. But of course, later on, when things get a little bit wonky, as you know, the animals escape. Their behavior, and especially their level of intelligence, is what's frightening. In fact, I would say that this is primarily a horror story, Jurassic Park, and that the dinosaurs are in fact presented as monsters. The main idea behind the story, again, going back to that, is that we have created something that we necessarily don't control. And, you know, the dinosaurs eventually break free, they're able to reproduce, etc., etc., etc. But because we don't understand it, because we don't have control over it, this is what necessarily turns them into monsters. So again, that mental model, we don't know what it's capable of doing, we don't know how it behaves, and therefore it is monstrous. Incidentally, as I said, they are a chimera. In the novel, just to clarify, and I refer to the novel insofar as it also refers back to the films, the more recent films. Henry Wu explains that the dinosaurs actually are just his idea of what the dinosaurs looked like, that there was not really much recoverable DNA. And as we know, DNA has a half-life of something like 500 years. 500 years compared to 65 million years. Yeah, certainly there is a particular amount of DNA that can survive that long. But you're really talking about scraps at that point. So he explains that basically he cobbled together a bunch of genetic characteristics into an embryo and just made an animal. You know, that's where there we go. A nice picture for you of gene editing stuff. Made an animal, and perchance it just looked, it was able to reproduce, and it was sort of guided to looking as to what he imagined dinosaurs looked like. And in fact, this is a critique that was sort of leveled during the novel, that the dinosaurs were, you know, they didn't have feathers. The theropods didn't have feathers. And one of the characters comments that it's weird, and obviously it's revealed that, yeah, actually, this was not his, you know, it was just his idea of what dinosaurs looked like, not necessarily real dinosaurs. And thanks for the comments. If I remember correctly, the Carnotaurs did look like chameleons in the second novel. The story behind that one is that Steven Spielberg approached Michael Crichton and asked him to write a sequel so that Steven Spielberg could make a sequel to the film. The second film has barely any resemblance to the second novel, but the second novel is more so of a horror story than the first one, I would say. The first one, you know, there's the novelty of dinosaurs, but the second one is quite terrifying, and it's actually discussing more the extinction of the dinosaurs, and it's actually about culture, in fact, more than anything else, and reflection on human culture and how the internet, in part, it's sort of half mentioned if I recall, how the internet poses a threat to our culture because it creates homogeneity. So yeah, and yeah, so the Carnotaurs did look like chameleons. They were able to camouflage extremely well, if I remember correctly. And they, I remember, sorry, it's a while ago since I actually read it. You know, I wasn't about to reread an entire book for a very silly live stream. There's a scene where one of the characters is hiding in a shed, and he cannot see the Carnotaurs just because they're so well camouflaged, but he can smell them. He can smell the rotting meat smell that usually goes with the carnivorous animal. So that was quite an interesting scene, a horrifying scene, in fact. And hello, Pokesaurus. Thank you for popping in. It's always good to see you guys, especially those of you who have been around a long time. I'd rather do, you know, feel that a lot of my effort that I put into returning has come apropos of your guys' frequent updates and frequent checking in. So thank you. But yeah, so the Carnotaurs are an example of that kind of genetic manipulation. They were not necessarily meant to be, you know, the Carnotaurs didn't necessarily do that in real life. Just Wu thought, oh, okay, let's make an animal that can do this because that's scary. And yeah, so basically these animals, at least initially, because we can't predict their behavior, because we have no idea what we're dealing with, they are monsters, at least by my definition. And I would like to point out a real life example of lions in a zoo. In this case, this lion has escaped from the zoo and is running around. I don't think that anybody here would say that the lion is a monster. You know, it's running around, it's scary, certainly. You know, it has the potential to harm you, but it's not a monster. That's because at least we understand that some portion of humanity knows how this animal behaves, and we were able to capture it. I contrast this again with the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, which were bred in captivity, which allows the dinosaurs to retain a degree of monstrosity, especially since we never see them out in the wild. However, the lion here, it grew up in the wild. It has a defined behavior pattern. We know that this thing is dangerous, but it's not likely to hunt someone down. It's most likely going to explore the zoo like a dog and generally have a fun time of it. So that's something to remember, I think. The lion is quite distinct from the dinosaurs, especially when it escapes. Unless, of course, anybody feels differently. I know that in my case, I would obviously run away, but, you know, at no point would I think that this is anything other than an animal that has escaped, and I wouldn't understand it any differently. So, for that reason, I can't really imprint onto this creature the idea that it is a monster. So yeah, intention. That's well, at least our ability to understand an animal's intention, our ability to have a mental model of how it behaves. Of course, the other thing is malice of intent. And here is a very silly image of a horrible alien thing. This looks scary. It looks like it wants to hurt you, and I would say that something that wants to cause harm, something that wants to cause destruction, is monstrous. And specifically, I say something that wants to cause harm is a monster, just because it also then gives us the opportunity to include human beings. We've often heard the phrase, you've often heard that somebody has been is a monster. You know, it's very easy to refer to like Stalin or Hitler or Genghis Khan, or you know, those the category of people as being monstrous or behaving as monsters or being monsters. And this is because their behavior was bent towards wanting to bring harm, wanting to bring destruction. And so this would be, for me, the second category, the behavior, and especially trying to hurt others or trying to destroy things. Another comment. Thank you, great say Kobe, Planet Zoid Star. Yes, you're welcome to check on the stream after everything's done. It's just a fun little chit chat. You know, look forward to responding to your comments a bit later as well. And so going back to my point, the way that things behave, the way that things behave in a malicious or destructive fashion is what necessarily makes them a monster, rather than, say, any innate characteristic within them. So this can apply to creatures like this horrible black thing that I have on the screen, because, you know, it sort of looks like the alien from Alien, and that animal only seemed to be wanting to kill and hurt people. Of course, we can say that initially it's a monster. Later on, when we understand it, this is part of its reproductive cycle. It's gonna stick a weird little pokey thing in you and lay an egg in your stomach and something like that. Sorry, it's got the little hand monster. You know, this is actually bloody silly because I did an entire video about xenomorphs. But yeah, they've got a hand monster, jumps in your face and lays an egg on you, and that's all they want. But before we know its intentions, it just seems to be acting maliciously and quite destructively, just hurting people, killing people, destroying things, and this is monstrous behavior. And necessarily that also gives us the opportunity to have a discussion about this guy, Geralt. Yay. I want to refer once more to the novels. As you know, he's got those two swords of his. In this image, he has three swords for some reason, one in his hand and two on his back. And in the novels, they discuss how he has a silver sword and a steel sword. I cannot remember in which one, but basically the discussion is that both swords are for monsters. However, some monsters are more vulnerable to steel, while others are more vulnerable to silver. And I point this out because I thought that there was a bit of an inelegant assertion in the very first game of The Witcher, where right at the very end, Geralt uses his silver sword to kill one of the big bads. And the big bad tries to defend himself by saying, "Oh no, you can't kill me. That sword is for monsters." To which Geralt replies, "Of course it is." And then, ends the gentleman. Again, a little bit on the nose. And if I recall, the soundtrack for the most recent one, the third, I say most recent one, it was a long time ago that this game came out, like 2015 or so, if I remember correctly. The soundtrack had the two songs. One was Steel for Humans and Silver for Monsters, which, at least in my opinion, obviously was incorrect. Now, I'm not saying, again, necessarily that one medium is superior to the other, but I do think that this was something that was lost in translation. So yeah, this distinction of that Geralt makes, that he's killing monsters, and that monsters can necessarily be not only animals but also people, and that the intelligence of the creature can vary, but it's mainly the intent and what it causes to the people around it, or what it does to the environment around it. That's an important consideration as to whether it is a monster or not. Now, Dread Pirate, excuse me for clearing my throat on the microphone, but Dread Pirate Bromondo, Phase 1, take a flightless bird, an atavism. Atavism, by the way, for those who are not familiar, is when something has an ancient characteristic from its genetic past reappear in its contemporary form. So, for example, for human beings, this would be like having a child born with a tail. So take a flightless bird with atavism and activate the heck out of it. Enhance the atavism, I assume you mean. And then phase 2, 3D print some artificial DNA to have the same skeletal proportions and O2 needs of all popular dinosaurs. Okay. And I assume this is in reference to making dinosaurs. A bird with atavism, so atavistic insofar as it's larger, I guess, and doesn't have, maybe has claws at the end of its wings. I could see it working, though. 3D print artificial DNA. Pulling my leg, eh? If only we could actually 3D print DNA. Although CRISPR is actually very close to being able to 3D print DNA. I remember the days when I was talking to some researcher friends of mine, and how they still had to do gene manipulation by firing a little bit of gold at a nucleus and just hoping something stuck. So that was those were very fun conversations. But yeah, you could probably manipulate the embryo of an egg to do something like that. Make a bird look like a dinosaur. Although honestly, you probably don't even have to go that far as to manipulating its DNA, directly, because you could just breed the characteristics back into a flock of birds. Birds have a very short life cycle, short reproduction cycle. So I imagine, you find a bird, you find a group of birds, and you you intentionally select them for, I guess, fewer feathers or shorter wings, it would be very difficult to find an opportunity to have a bird redevelop bones, but it's not impossible. You see, generally speaking, with evolution, it's easier to add things than to take them away, or to even modify existing structures. But what you do find is that this, pardon me, I've never had to explain this to someone. It's mostly just knowledge that I've received from textbooks. But basically, structures in your DNA have a tendency and a preference for recursion. So you think of a worm. A worm has segments of its body that are all extensions of basically one segment. They're all basically the same thing, just repeated across the entire length of the worm. And what DNA likes to do is precisely that. It doesn't mind adding to a creature so long as it only needs to repeat or slightly expand on what already exists. That's an easier way of breeding something. But of course, it's not necessarily outside of the question to turn a bird into a dinosaur again. So yeah, phase 3, giant Buckminster Fuller cloud, and 2, a terrarium, dinosaurs with high O2. Okay, that's interesting. You could maybe. So I wouldn't put that much oxygen into a terrarium, because what you'd end up doing is you'd have a very large bomb at that point. The percentage difference it seems like, I think only it's about what, 10%, or even less than, maybe 5% difference, our atmosphere from the Cretaceous or the Jurassic period. But it would be very, very, very flammable. I don't know if you'd be able to get in there safely or even leave there safely. You would have to be very careful. I mean, of course, the International Space Station is, I think, like 100% oxygen at 10% pressure. So it's not like we don't know how to deal with such environments, but you've got so many more factors to take into consideration when you're on Earth. So yeah, you could do that, but I'm sure that you wouldn't need to. You wouldn't, because remember, you'd be starting with animals that already have a metabolism that is adapted to our current environment. So, although the extra oxygen would help, certainly in the case if you want to make insects larger, at least by the current theories, I don't quite know if it would be necessary. You could do it safely, I guess, without having a terrarium full of oxygen. I wonder if the best candidate for a bird species to breed into dinosaur traits back into would be Hoatzin. I'm sorry, I've never heard of that bird. Hoatzin bird. This is the chicks actually are born with claws on their wings and some. Okay, so it's similar to Archaeopteryx. I'm not familiar with that bird, and I'm sorry, I haven't set up the live stream in such a way that I can bring up an internet window right now. I wasn't planning to, but I will. I'll see what I can learn a bit more about it, and maybe in my next live stream we can go over it, because that would be an interesting topic, seeing how gene editing and genetic manipulation works, breeding, etc. So yeah, that would be an interesting topic. I'll keep that in mind. Dinosaurs would likely easily cope with our modern atmosphere, actually. Yeah, I honestly think so. What I think actually the dinosaurs had that was particularly interesting was their ability to grow very rapidly. And I mean, obviously I might be talking a bit out of my backside here, but I think that this may have been a defense against cancer, simply because when you look at large animals like whales, when they develop cancer, the size of the cancer, even if it gets to the size of, say, a rugby ball, it's still less than 1% of the animal's whole volume or mass. Whereas a cancer that size on a human being would be, terrifying. And you look at a lot of small animals like hamsters or gerbils, they tend to die of cancer quite a lot. So I think, at least in part, one of the reasons that they grew so large was a response to cancers. I think that they grew, at least by some estimates, like a kilogram a day. Absolutely ridiculous growth rate. Really, really, really fast. I only had them with metabolism to make sure that they choke out in them. Okay, I see. So you basically, this was your lysine response, where Michael Crichton had the animals dependent on lysine sources and thereby supposedly controlling them. Of course, later in both the film and the novels, they ended up eating soybeans, something that's offhandedly mentioned in the second film, if I remember correctly. Whereas you, Dread Pirate, want them dependent on a high oxygen concentration so as to, if they escape, they die. I mean, it makes sense. Again, I think that there's probably better ways to control it. And remember, these aren't real dinosaurs that we'd be making if we were to be breeding them. These would be chimera again. These would be unnatural animals. There would be ways, I think, to control them, but I don't think that they would necessarily be outside of the environment. It's an interesting philosophical conversation because one of the points that Michael Crichton was making with Jurassic Park was that after we made these animals and released them into nature, we're necessarily altering the world around us. Once we've done it, we can't take it back. And I wonder if we could consider this to be one of those situations where, we've cast our die, we've made the animal, and now we've just got to accept that the world is the way it is and accept that nature itself has to now bend around what we've done. To a degree, this has already happened. As you know, we've killed off many species, and we've introduced and altered many species around the world. I don't think that there's very many unaltered species left. Certainly, the megafauna in Africa, anything that's obvious is as it was from ages ago. But cows, sorry, not cows, cattle. There's not a single, as I mentioned earlier, there's not a single aurochs left. We've just got cattle, which are bred animals. Dogs, cats to a degree are bred, well, to a very large degree are bred. Many plant species, they look nothing like their ancient ancestors. So, and these things exist out in the wild now. The world has already adapted, so I don't, it's not all doom and gloom, I would say, when considering things that we make. In fairness, you got the idea from Matthew Patrick and film theory. The name rings a bell. Oh, yes. He was very popular back in the day with the Five Nights at Freddy's, wasn't he? I remember watching a few of his videos yonks ago. I didn't know that he was still about. Look, I mean, I'm not bashing the idea per se. Just to be clear, to both yourself and Matthew by proxy, but I think that it's worth considering all the other factors. I will see if I can find the video that he spoke about this in, and maybe get a bit more detail. But I still think that maybe manipulating oxygen like that would be a poor idea. There must be some other way, some better way to, if you wanted to control animals, some better way to do it. Because, I mean, just shock collars. Yeah, the whole point of Jurassic Park was to sort of try and present the animals in their natural environment. So, without any kind of without any obvious restrictions, besides the fencing, of course, like a zoo. So I think that, just get a collar or a tracking chip. I'm sure there's something we could do. But again, the issue in Jurassic Park was that they were breeding. So, you can't necessarily do it in that case. The whole point behind the breeding plot line was that, if I remember correctly, they had designed a computer system to count the dinosaurs, and it was designed to expect 200 and something dinosaurs, and it would count 200 and something dinosaurs. But then when they increased the number of animals to expect to something like 600 or 700, the computer system ended up counting 500 and something animals, and they were, obviously shocked. They were like, "Wow, we didn't realize we had this many dinosaurs on the island. They're clearly breeding." So it was an example of the failure of human understanding and expectation. So yeah, quite again, it's a really good story. If you don't have the time to sit and read it, which, especially with the way things are these days, who really has time? But I do recommend, like, get an audiobook version of it or something. Just try and engage with it, and I would say watch it in tandem with the film, because I really want to emphasize that point, that the film and the book are really good for different reasons. Sort of like it's a rare event where a film and a novel upon which the film is based are actually both good. Usually, when translating from a novel, you lose a lot of detail, and this incenses fans. It just usually doesn't work out. But things like, Jurassic Park, like Lord of the Rings, like Harry Potter, to a certain degree, I would say, do a damn good job of translating. But anyway, back to the main point. And just to finish everything off, I won't keep anybody much longer. Monsters, I feel, could generally be summarized in those two categories. Their intention is what makes them monstrous, or their unknown behavior, our stance relative to what we know about them, is what turns something into a monster. And it's from that point that I would say human beings are well adapted to killing monsters, not necessarily outright murdering them, but rather in our minds taking something that is scary, taking something that is monstrous, and in our minds coming to understand them, facing them, and turning them into animals. And that's probably one of the things that people, human beings, are meant to do, is take the monstrous and turn them into animals. So yeah, my silly attempt at being poignant and philosophical there. But yeah, with that, I don't have much more to say, and pardon me, I do have other matters to attend to. So if you all are satisfied and happy, I will revisit the topic a bit later in another live stream. And especially, I will take a look at the what was that animal again? The Hoatzin bird. Sounds like a South American animal. Take a look at the Hoatzin bird, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about genetic manipulation and breeding of animals in another live stream. So, with that, thank you, everybody. Have a good day, especially those of you on the western side of the world who are probably about to go to bed. Sleep well. And those of you on my side,